How bad is Bitcoin mining for our environment? That's a question that you need to know the answer to, because if you're a skeptic or you're a Bitcoin bull that thinks we go to $1 million a coin, if Bitcoin mining is actually bad for our environment, that's something that could end the bull run. There's news articles that say it's heating our oceans. Some articles say that it's going to use all the world's power, and you need to know the fact. And so on this episode of the Profit Maximalist Show, I have on Marty Bent. He works at a Bitcoin mining company, and we answer everything that you need to know about Bitcoin mining, and also why I think it's actually good for the environment. We'll explain what I mean by that and why billions of dollars of these environmentally friendly funds are probably also going to invest in Bitcoin in the long run. You have to understand this for the long-term trend. If it's actually bad for our planet, well, that's something that could end the bull run. But if it's positive for our planet, that's a wild claim to make, but you'll see what I'm talking about. I think this thing could get a lot bigger than people realize, and mining is not going to get in the way. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode of the Profit Maximalist Show. Hit the like button right down below if you've been enjoying these, and subscribe. I have some episodes out with huge traders coming out this week, and also market updates, Bitcoin at 50K. We have a lot to talk about on the trading side. But first, everything you need to know about Bitcoin mining with Marty Bent. Enjoy this one, guys. I'll see you on the next episode.
There's only one way out from here, and that's up.
We're going up! It's $100 million.
Glad we can finally do this, brother. How are you?
Doing well, Luke. I'm pumped we could do this as well.
The timing is perfect. It's that time of year. Maybe it has to do with how well Bitcoin's doing, but I have probably 5 headlines today on my timeline of Reuters and CNBC and Bloomberg saying Bitcoin mining is destroying the planet. What the fuck's going on, man?
We're out here just trying to boil the oceans. You know what? The world has gotten to such a dire strait. We just need to expedite the process with Bitcoin mining and boil the oceans. It's time. Sorry, everybody, that you're angry, but yeah, it's a weird thing. The price cycle. As soon as the price goes up, all the haters who are waiting on the sidelines and have been naysaying Bitcoin for quite some time need to find a reason to pull it down. And I think the energy usage is one of the easier, lazier avenues that the detractors tend to take.
Yeah, it seems like Bitcoin mining is only bad for the planet when the price is really high. Like all the other detractions and criticisms and reasons why it should fail didn't work because clearly Bitcoin's winning. So now it is destroying the planet. It's always kind of funny to see.
It's tiresome, but you know what? It's fun. It helps you sharpen your rebuttals to this FUD and actually people that are listening in on the conversations going on Twitter and podcasts like this actually get to learn. It is a learning experience, and actually, sure. I do think it has like a Streisand effect to a certain degree, because once you actually understand what's going on, it's hard to deny that Bitcoin mining is actually good for the environment overall and the energy industry and humanity at the end of the day.
Sure. That's a big claim, and I want to dive into that, right? Because what actually sparked this and me wanting to do this is not only the timelines. As price goes up and as Bitcoin keeps doing well, 40K is not the top. It's going to get bigger. There's going to be more investors looking at this, new people coming in droves, and they're going to say, is Bitcoin mining actually bad for the planet? So I want to dive into that, and I think the best way to kind of approach that, actually, for all my listeners too that might not be familiar with you, you're kind of like a Renaissance Bitcoiner. You were the Bitcoin guy at Barstool. You left, and now you host one of the most well-known, largest Bitcoin shows in the world, Tales from the Crypt. And you also do a fair bit in the mining space at Great American Mining. Did I miss anything? What else are you working on so people are familiar?
The podcast, business development at Great American Mining. Then I write the newsletter as well. So the daily newsletter is actually what started it all. That's what led me to Barstool. The person that dragged me into Barstool found me via the newsletter. Then he actually forced me to start the podcast. So it's been a weird journey since June 2017 when I started the newsletter. If you would have told, gosh, how old was I? I was like 26 then. If you would have told me at 26 where I'd be now at 29, I'd be like, shut the hell up. What the hell's going on here?
It's the journey is pretty wild forever. I think Bitcoin just kind of takes you, whatever you're doing, focusing on in life, wherever you're at, it's like it sweeps you up and just brings you along for the ride. It's crazy, man. All right, so the best way I think we can dive into this, the claim that Bitcoin is bad for the earth is what most people see. It's what Reuters is spreading. It's what all the media is spreading. And I think also some investors kind of don't know. Is it bad? Like maybe they believe it's bad, but they don't care because they want to make some money, versus your claim that it's actually positive for the planet. I think the best way to dive into whether or not those are true and then let people decide for themselves would be why does Bitcoin need mining? What purpose does it serve for Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, so mining's in some part what makes the network go around. Like the way Bitcoin's consensus mechanism works, if you want to have a distributed consensus mechanism in a distributed system, the peer-to-peer cash system that Satoshi launched, you need to find the fairest way and the most efficient way in which to basically confirm new blocks on the ledger and release Bitcoins to the market. And proof of work, the consensus mechanism that Bitcoin works, specifically Hashcash SHA-256, proof of work is what Bitcoin uses, and that takes a lot of energy, and there's no denying that. Like Bitcoin does use a massive amount of energy. We'll get into it later, diving into the particular types of energy and how miners decide to use that energy, but plain and simple, to add blocks to the Bitcoin ledger, the amount of energy needed is pretty significant because miners are competing to find a hash below the difficulty target so that they can add a block of transactions to the network. And that is the most fair way to have this distributed ledger work, right? The probabilistic nature of finding a hash below the current difficulty target is, in my opinion, the most fair way to distribute coins to the network and allow anybody who has access to hardware and an internet connection to contribute to the Bitcoin network. And proof of work specifically allows the network to come to asynchronous consensus. So due to the latency of data transfer, when you're trying to have these ledgers append themselves around the world, other sort of consensus mechanisms aren't really ideal. So the fact that you're finding a hash that proves that you did some work, you expended some energy, and you can prove you did that work by producing a hash again below the current difficulty target, is the fairest way and the only way that you can have this distributed consensus in a global society, in a world where distance is the distance between different players is pretty significant. You have miners in China, miners in the US, literally on opposite sides of the world. So proof of work allows them to reach an asynchronous consensus in a fair fashion.
So proof of work by that SHA-256 algorithm lets people all around the world do that. There's obviously other consensus mechanisms. I want to talk about that and why Satoshi chose proof of work for Bitcoin. But I think it's also important to contrast, like if you think about any other system, like talk about our current centralized system with the dollar, like why doesn't that system use, tons of energy? Why does Bitcoin just get this hate? And the way that I think of it is, well, it's because you're relying, or you have to trust that the bank or the Federal Reserve is the one just keeping track of all this. They're not expending energy because it's just all in their hands. They're just updating a spreadsheet or updating their system that's tracking it, versus this system being run by individuals and people all over the world being distributed. You have to, put in work. We're not relying on one person to keep track. It's trustless in the sense that everyone is making sure that this is the right balance. This got paid out to the miners. Is that a pretty fair comparison?
Well, the Bitcoin's competitor, its main competitor, the U.S. dollar reserve system, actually does expend a lot of energy to make sure that that the dollar is the dominant currency of the world, is the reserve currency of the world. The main difference is that Bitcoin wears its energy consumption on its sleeve, right? So the fact that Bitcoin is an open protocol, an open network, and anybody at any given point in time can go publicly look up the amount of hash rate dedicated to mining blocks on the Bitcoin network, and by knowing the hash rate, you can sort of ballpark the amount of energy that's being consumed. It's really easy to point at Bitcoin and say, hey, this is consuming a lot of energy. Again, it wears its energy consumption on its sleeve because it's an open protocol, an open source system. Compare that to the US dollar reserve system. Yes, like at the end of the day, they're only the appending of that ledger, especially when you're printing new dollars, is just as Ben Bernanke said, just switching digits in a machine. But however, to protect that, right, you have the military-industrial complex that is guarding oil fields around the world. Like some would argue that the dollar's reserve status is really pinned due to the nature that other countries have to convert their native currencies to U.S. dollars to purchase oil on the international markets. So you have that energy consumption, the U.S. military-industrial complex, and there is some data out there that you could point to. The U.S. military specifically consumes the most oil out of any entity in the world, and then on top of that, the layers above that base layer, the U.S. dollar reserve system protected by the military, you have the banking system, and the banking system involves large buildings, paper, computers in those buildings, people commuting to and from those buildings to actually facilitate the work necessary to make that banking system and that centralized ledger work. So at the end of the day, like, I would argue that the actual energy expended to preserve the U.S. dollar reserve system and make sure that the financial system facilitates in a fashion that allows easy transfer of money and easy the ability to conduct finance actually dwarfs Bitcoin energy consumption. When you add all those up, the difference is, again, Bitcoin wears that energy consumption on its sleeve. You can point at the hash rate, whereas the JP Morgan Chase building, the Citigroup building, they're not publicly reporting the kilowatt hours expended in those buildings or the amount of gas guzzled between their employees commuting to and from work. Combining that with the amount of gas used by and energy used by the military industrial complex, is just really hard to make a fair comparison because the two competitors are not sharing the same data in the same fashion.
Yeah. For skeptics that are saying, okay, let's say they even agree with you that the dollar is using all that energy, why not build a new money system that's far more efficient? Why do we have to have this proof of work, which seems to be, for people that are uninformed, and we haven't got to maybe why it isn't as energy intensive or isn't as bad for the planet as many claim, but why not use something like proof of stake, right? Satoshi chose proof of work. He chose SHA-256, and it's kind of crazy how well he's been able to kind of predict how all these things would play out and made a game theory system where, you know, it's incentivizing everyone to kind of work together on this. Why did he choose proof of work if he was so kind of thoughtful in the way he designed this versus something like proof of stake, where other coins have claimed this is more energy efficient, we should use this, Bitcoin is bad?
There's a couple things here. So, I mean, going back into the history of digital currency, I believe it was Wei Dai's B Money. They attempted to implement a proof of stake system, and it failed. I don't even think they launched it, actually, because Wei sort of realized that there were some centralizing factors in that particular consensus mechanism.
Is that pre-Bitcoin?
Yeah, pre-Bitcoin. This was like in the 90s, I believe.
Okay.
And or early 2000s. I forget exactly when. But so there was that history in the digital currency movement before Bitcoin, where it was at least thought out, and a lot of smart cypherpunks working on these technologies that build up to Bitcoin started to realize that there were centralizing factors in a proof of stake consensus mechanism. And then bringing it back to proof of work, again, the probabilistic nature of finding a hash is arguably the most fair way to have this asynchronous consensus, whereas in a proof of stake system, it's driven more by capital. The more capital you have, the more control you have over the network at any given point in time. And the nature of proof of stake and the ability for third parties like exchanges to offer higher yields on staked coins, like we're already seeing this trend happen. Coinbase is offering staking yields on Tezos. Binance is doing the same thing. And actually, my co-host on Rabbit Hole Recap, Matt Odell, has been keeping a thread for years now. That's sort of the first tweet says, hey, proof of stake is naturally going to be a centralized consensus mechanism due to the advantage these centralized third parties have to offer yield services to their customers. And I think that's what we'll see out of it. Comparing proof of work to proof of stake specifically, proof of work, again, is probabilistic in nature. and proof of stake is not as probabilistic. It's not as fair because capital can sort of rule the day, and that's something we're trying to get away from.
Right.
Yeah.
So proof of work obviously necessary here for Bitcoin, and having that fair mechanism. Now that that's been, I think that's known. I think that's an agreed concept of almost everyone listening and watching. But is it bad? Like when they say that all this energy consumption, which is clearly necessary for Bitcoin and what it's trying to achieve, how is that bad? Is it the energy output? Some people have Mike Green, he had that debate with Nick Carter, and he was saying, look, all this mining that's happening in China, largely being driven by oil or coal, that's horrible for the environment. Like, is this actually bad? What's the breakdown there? How is this actually hurting the planet?
Well, with that particular line with China using coal, there are some miners in China that use coal.
And some are hydro, yeah.
Well, most are hydro. So that's the thing. A lot of these critics will take the breakdown of energy sources all throughout China. They'll take that distribution and they'll thrust it on the Bitcoin mining industry within China. They'll say, hey, here's the overall breakdown of China's energy consumption: 60% coal, 10%, I don't know, I'm making up here, 10% hydro, and yada yada yada, which is true in China. But then they'll thrust that distribution on the Bitcoin mining industry. It just simply isn't true. Like if you actually go, and CoinShares has done this, Chris Ben-Dixon, the head of research at CoinShares, has actually gone to China and talked to miners, and what they found is that most are using hydroelectric. Yes, some are using coal, but due to the nature of the Bitcoin mining industry and the incentives of the Bitcoin mining world, and the number one incentive being to find the lowest cost of energy production, you'll come to find that the cheapest energy sources tend to be stranded renewables or wasted fossil fuels that are also stranded. And so the beauty of Bitcoin and proof of work consensus specifically is that it provides, for the first time in human history, an incentive to go consume these stranded energy resources, and because they can be profitable on the spot. It's the first time ever you can go consume this energy and make a profit out of it without having to transport it to market to be consumed. You can consume it right on the spot and use your internet connection to send your hashes to a mining pool and get rewarded in Bitcoin for doing so. And so you don't physically have to transport the energy to market that far. Instead of building pipelines or wires that are hundreds of miles long, you build a pipeline that's a couple dozen feet long, or a little generator that takes up a very small footprint in these stranded areas.
So this is one of the most unique angles I've heard. Breedlove has talked about it. I heard you talk about it on the Clubhouse. Nick has kind of expanded on it. Is that Bitcoin is like this geographically agnostic demand for energy that we've just never had before. Because this is, I didn't know this about energy, but energy actually usually has to be produced pretty close to where it's going to be used. It's not like you can just go find the most rural area in the world, produce a bunch of energy because it's cheaper there, and then ship it to a city so they can use it. Generally, you have to produce that energy, and then in order to harness it and transport it and let people use it, it has to be pretty close. Like, it's just hard to transport energy over far distances versus something like Bitcoin. The claim is that, look, you can find those areas where energy is cheaper or where there's excess energy. Sometimes in China, they've just built too much hydro. That energy is going to be wasted. Now you can buy Bitcoin. You can move that Bitcoin anywhere and then sell it. How is that actually helping, though? This is kind of one of the things that I understand that angle. I understand that now Bitcoin is allowing people to do that, to convert the energy that they would be wasting anyways into dollars. But how is that actually helping the planet? Like, if there is this energy source, it's very cheap to produce in some rural region of China, they would get rid of it anyways. How does that help the planet by now allowing them to make money on it?
Yeah, so in short, you're being more efficient with these energy sources. Like, there's no net new production of these energy sources just to mine Bitcoin. These Bitcoin miners are saying, hey, this energy is being wasted. It's literally like the hydro dams are running. Nobody's consuming this energy. We might as well come and consume it. And it works out for us because it's extremely cheap. And that, like, so that's good I mean, there's no like net difference, right?
I
Like
see.
there's
Yep.
no net new energy, and then on top of that, like the economic value, the positive economic value that's produced via mining, is a net good for society overall, like contributing to GDP with energy that would otherwise literally would have been wasted is good for society. You're literally uplifting the wealth of the entire planet by utilizing these stranded energy sources.
How much energy would you say is from that or is sustainable? Nick on Bloomberg yesterday said there was some research group, I think it was Cambridge Analytica, did a report, and it was something close to like 30 or 40% of Bitcoin mining energy is actually renewable energy. And I know that your company focuses on a really unique way to kind of use wasted energy that would be hurting the environment and turns into Bitcoin. What's the trade-off there? Have you seen any statistics that show this is energy that's being put into, it's contributing to all this energy used to make Bitcoin versus this is stuff that's just wasted anyways? This is renewable stuff that's now used to help people all around the world that would be wasted.
Yeah. So this is the sort of, I don't know if it's a double-edged sword or like the beauty of Bitcoin mining, like the nature of this asynchronous probabilistic consensus mechanism makes it so like the miners literally have to come and tell you what they're using, or you have to go seek them out and figure out what energy sources they're using. So the range of estimates is from like 30 to 70%
Right.
renewables. But again, the goal of miners is to drive their cost of power production down as low as possible. Right now, if you're using top of the line hardware and you're not mining below 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour, you're probably not going to be you're not going to have an operation extending too long into the future. So the goal to go find and drop your cost of power production below that level and even lower, it makes you go find these wasted resources, and they just so happen to most likely be stranded renewables, or in our case, natural gas that's being wasted via flare or vent, or is simply shut in and not being utilized at all. And so again, the journey to drive this cost of power production drives miners to inefficiencies in the energy value chain, and just makes it more efficient, and overall contributes to the GDP of the globe and the wealth of the world. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to know exactly, like the miners aren't going to go and like consume oil to mine in some places because it's simply too expensive. Like you're not going to just go buy barrels of oil and put it into a generator to mine Bitcoin. It's like not going to get your cost of power production down low enough. It's very nuanced, right? And then the nature of Bitcoin is such that you have to go actually find these miners to find the answers. And again, there's people that have done that, whether it's Cambridge or CoinShares, and the data they're bringing back is like, hey, yeah, the cheapest sources are typically renewables in a lot of places, and if it's not renewables, it's wasted fossil fuels that would otherwise do more harm to the atmosphere if they were simply flared or vented and then run through like an EPA certified generator and combusted to power Bitcoin miners.
I want you to explain a little bit more what your company does, because you're the way that you guys have found that cheaper energy and its impact, I think, is kind of beautiful in the way that you describe it. Of that energy would be hurt, or that wasted energy would be hurting the world much more, would be hurting the environment much more. And for people that complain and say, as Bitcoin grows, the energy consumption is going to be bigger and it's going to destroy our planet. My opinion, after learning what I've learned and what we're talking about now, is that it's actually helping slow that process, and if anything, start to reverse it. What can you explain, like step by step, what your company does with that wasted or flared gas, and how it turns into Bitcoin, and what that gas would be doing if it wasn't being turned in and mined to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so right now we're predominantly in the Bakken in North Dakota specifically, and we're there because the state of North Dakota has very strict flaring regulations. Like the way oil drilling works, like you IP a well, you drill a well, and not only is oil coming out of the ground, but massive amounts of methane are coming out of the ground as well, natural gas. And methane is a very heavy greenhouse gas. So the leaking of that into the atmosphere is something over time 20 to 50 times worse, again, depending on your time scale for the atmosphere than just pure CO2. And so to attempt to reduce that effect on the atmosphere, what you'll find is a lot of these producers flare. So they'll bring out just like a huge flare stack and literally just light the gas on fire. So it's not methane going up to the atmosphere. Instead, it's CO2. They combust it. Like, all right, like at least it's not methane. We're putting CO2 up there. But depending on what flare you use and what time of year it is and what the weather conditions are like, those flares can be very inefficient. So if it's windy, if the wind's blowing like more than 10 miles an hour, there's some studies that show that some flares could have only like 30% efficiency in burning that methane. And so even though you're putting a good effort forward to reduce the methane leak, the weather makes it so that there is going to be leaks, and you can't really control that to a certain degree. And so what we do is we say, hey, we're going to help you out in a couple ways here. Instead of flaring that gas, which cost you money, it's a drag on your balance sheet. It is costly from a regulatory perspective. You can only flare so much before you have to shut down your oil production. We'll take that gas, instead of piping it to a flare stack, redirect the pipes to our EPA certified generator. We'll run it through there, and that'll combust the methane with 99.99% efficiency into CO2. And then as a benefit on the back end, we're gonna use that to power our Bitcoin miners, which are going to be able to get you a positive revenue stream and an alternative revenue stream that's driven by demand factors that are completely separate from your core business, which is getting oil and gas to market. So depending on where the wells are, whether or not they have the ability to connect to a pipeline to deliver that gas to market, whether or not the pipelines even have capacity, even if they are available, sometimes there isn't enough capacity to get the gas into the pipeline to get it to the midstream provider and eventually the market. So we come in and say, hey, we're going to bring the market to the molecule. Instead of you trying to figure out how to get this to market or to flare it, we're going to solve your problem by showing up and consuming it ourselves, and then we'll turn that into Bitcoin, and we can do like a rev share, a joint venture. You'll be able to turn this into a positive revenue stream, which makes the producers resilient overall. And the second and third order effects that this operation has on their businesses and then the environment are pretty profound.
And the second and third order effects then of now more people, as you said, kind of the GDP of nations rising. It's more people also being able to store this wealth that they just created for themselves, as opposed to if they weren't doing this, they didn't have this separate revenue stream, their dollar's losing value. I mean, the list goes on here.
Yeah, well, because again, this separate revenue stream driven by a service that's demanded 24/7, 365, which is adding blocks to the Bitcoin blockchain. Like there's demand for that literally every second of every day. Those demand drivers are completely separate of the demand drivers of the oil and gas market, which depend on the amount of oil being produced at any given point in time, the weather in the particular part of the country you're in, and many other factors, how much people are traveling, blah, 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 blah. The addition of the Bitcoin mining revenue stream really adjusts the opportunity cost for the oil and gas operators. And this is where it gets really heady, because before Bitcoin mining and oil fields came to be, the producer would go out there again. Some of the questions they ask, all right, I'm going to IP this well. How many flare stacks do I need? How many flares do I need? How many LNG units, which is liquid natural gas? So you can have these LNG units that compress the gas into liquid, and you can put those in trucks and deliver that energy source to market. But that's not very profitable. It's very capital intensive as well. The margins in that are slim to negative. That's another drag on the balance sheet. Do we build a pipeline to get this gas to market? Like those are some of the questions that producers were asking before Bitcoin mining existed. Now that they have this alternative revenue stream, they begin to take a step back and ask different questions. Like, do I really need a pipeline? I don't need a flare stack. I don't need LNG units to compress this and get the liquid to market. Like, I can literally just take this gas and turn it into Bitcoin. And so what you'll find, again, the third order effects on the environment, or second or third order effects on the environment, are such that like the decisions that these producers make are shifted drastically, where arguably they don't need to drill as many wells, they don't need to build as many pipelines, because they have this separate revenue stream. Like the fact that oil prices have been relatively depressed over the last 12 years has driven the shale industry to drill more wells, because they need to make up the lack of profits from an increased price with volume. So they need to get more volume to market to keep a status quo in profits for their businesses. And so, like, if you're able to supplement the oil and gas sales with Bitcoin mining, you don't have to worry about that as much. You don't have to worry about getting as much volume to market, drilling as many wells, building as many pipelines, and those have effects on the environment as well.
It's so funny how one example, and I imagine we could do this for hydro mining, what's happening in China with that excess energy. We could do this for all these different types of renewables, but yours specifically just completely destroys the narrative that as you mine Bitcoin, that's contributing to Bitcoin, to the planet Earth being destroyed. I mean, the timeline from Reuters today was Elon Musk wants clean power, but Tesla is carrying Bitcoin's dirty baggage. And it's funny, like, you know, in a lot of ways, Tesla making electric vehicles is directly kind of hurting the oil industry. Bitcoin is that's helping Elon's vision. It's now taking some of those negative externalities of oil production and making them positive for the planet. As you said, drilling less wells, taking that flared gas, turning it into Bitcoin. It's so, like, I don't know how that can still be a narrative today. It's wild. That's one example, and it completely destroys it.
Yeah, well, again, people are lazy, and it's hard. Like, unless you're like, people don't understand the energy markets. Like, they don't understand how grid systems work. And again, like, from Bitcoin as a grid load system is another interesting application. Like, grids, they produce enough energy to supply peak demand. Like in the winter, when it's extremely cold around Christmas, when everybody's running Christmas lights, they're going to produce enough energy on their grid to service that demand at that point in the winter, and alternatively in the hottest points of the summer. And they're doing that year round because they have to build their grids that size and have energy flowing through their grids year round to make sure they're operational. So in those time periods between the peak demand, between Christmas time and the middle of July, you have excess energy that's being produced, and Bitcoin miners can step in and say, hey, we'll consume that, and we can be efficient with that energy as well. So, like, you go down the list, and where Bitcoin miners sort of just nuzzle into the energy industry, they're really creating efficiencies and again helping the environment and stabilizing grids, which is a very, very big innovation that people are overlooking. The stabilization of the grids alone should be something that we should be grateful that Bitcoin mining is around to help with.
You know, there's environmental funds, like investment funds that only focus on green energy products, or there's all types of funds. I think they're called ESG funds, and they won't invest in tobacco, or they won't invest in oil and a lot of different industries, right? Their goal is to help people allocate their capital to things that are not only beneficial to the money, but also beneficial to the planet. I wonder how long it takes. I looked up, JP Morgan has a fund. It's like $3.1 billion. I think that's their largest ESG fund. They have tons of other separate funds that are 1 billion, half a billion. And that's just one bank, that has a $5 billion ESG fund. How long until some of those funds allow Bitcoin to be one of the assets that's invested there? I mean, it's funny, like, I think there's going to be a point in time where Bitcoin goes from, on Reuters and CNBC and Bloomberg, from them saying Bitcoin is bad for the environment, to a point in time where it's pretty wild if you don't include Bitcoin in an environmentally focused fund.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we pitch to producers, and producers come to us to help them fulfill as their ESG mandates. Again, the ESG mandates in the oil and gas industry specifically target flare and like we can help them check off, like, all right, we're being ESG friendly by reducing our flare. So we're already seeing Bitcoin specifically come in to help push forward an ESG like mandate that is being thrust on the oil and gas industry specifically. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's going to be a few years at least until like the JP Morgans of the world and those ESG focused funds begin investing in Bitcoin, because the FUD, the energy FUD against Bitcoin is so strong right now. But again, like, I think the truth will prevail. It's sort of obvious when you actually look into it and you peel the layers of what's going on behind the scenes. It's impossible to deny that this is beneficial for the environment and society overall. And this doesn't even get into the fact that, like, a lot of the energy FUD detractors typically attach the fact that they don't believe that Bitcoin provides value to its energy consumption. They say, oh, how is it consuming this much energy? And all it is a speculative asset, or an asset for drug dealers, terrorists, and money launderers. But they completely neglect the fact that Bitcoin's providing immense utility for millions of people around the world, whether you be an individual like yourself or myself looking to store value in a scarce asset, or dissidents in countries like Nigeria, Belarus, Russia, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, looking to escape despotic regimes that are shutting down bank accounts and stopping people from transacting with each other, or people simply trying to escape hyperinflationary scenarios in countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe. So the energy FUD usually comes with a line that Bitcoin mining isn't producing anything valuable, which is just patently false as well.
Yeah, they parlay those two together. It'd be even better. I would love a study that would show, I mean, even if Bitcoin hypothetically was had no supply, let's say it had no utility as a store of value asset or helping dissidents or all these things. There's another utility that you just mentioned in that helping these oil producers and people that are hurting the environment, it helps them meet their ESG mandates. I mean, just as that, it could be like an environmental credit asset. Like, you know, these firms and these people that are hurting the earth have mandates and regulations they have to follow. If the only thing that Bitcoin did was help those people stay under that mandate, I'm sure it would have a value. And I think that value would be pretty damn high.
Right. And it's, again, the laziness from the journalist class is quite frustrating, but again, the truth will prevail. And I would love to see some of these people go to the Bakken, North Dakota, and actually see these flares being reduced. That's the powerful nature of what we do at Great American Mining. That makes me proud, is like you can visibly see the effects that Bitcoin mining is having in the field. Like you literally, the flares will be going, and as soon as you turn the generator on and siphon off the gas to your generators, the flare is reduced like to nothing. It's like a visual illustration of Bitcoin materially helping the environment in this particular case. But then beyond that, like, I'd love these journalists to go to Nigeria and tell the women of the SARS movement, the end SARS movement, that Bitcoin isn't providing them any value. Like, love for them to go to Venezuela, to Caracas, to individuals who are receiving Bitcoin from family abroad just to survive, and tell them that Bitcoin isn't providing them any value. It's a very lazy and privileged position that a lot of individuals in the journalist class here in the West particularly have taken, and they're gonna regret having this position in a few years from now. It's because again, the truth is going to prevail. It's going to be so obvious that they had no idea what they're talking about.
What I'm going to do, for if any journalist is listening, I imagine you're not, generally just because you hate Bitcoin. But if you know a journalist and you follow them on Twitter or they follow you, please share this episode and pass along the message that I will sponsor a trip. I'll go with them because I would love to see one of your fields and see that flare visually. I will sponsor them to come with me. I would love to see it, and I would love for them to see it. And that'd be a really cool story that we can get put into Reuters or wherever the hell they publish that FUD every single week, because we're going to see a lot more of it. So share this with a journalist that you follow. Share this. Tag the guy who just wrote that Reuters article. I will sponsor his trip. I'll pay for his room and board, and we'll go visit that field, man. That'd be a fun little field trip for me and for the guy who keeps writing that FUD.
Get your hard hats ready. Get your long johns on. It's cold in North Dakota this time of year.
It's
The
cold here
boys
too.
we're actually deploying some containers out there right now. It's like, look, I mean, luckily I'm the business development manager for me, and I don't have to be in the field. But the boys in the field this week are freezing their nads off. They're sending screenshots of like negative 13 degree, negative 40 degree wind chill. But got to get it done, and it's beautiful. That's the other crazy thing about Bitcoin mining. We go into these harsh conditions where nobody wants to live, and deploy these profitable mining containers. It's a beautiful thing.
Helps the community. Well, like I said, sponsor that message or send that message out. I'm sponsoring a trip. I would love to bring a journalist along and let them see it. Marty, I want to ask you a couple questions. I asked Twitter what their mining questions were, their FUD articles, and these things come up. Whether or not there is FUD about them, I'm just kind of curious if you have any answers here. People talk about as Bitcoin does get bigger, right? Even if they agree that, sure, maybe it's not all hurting the planet, but as Bitcoin continues to get bigger and it's consuming all this energy, it's going to consume all the world's energy. There's an article back from Yahoo. It was published in 2017 that said by 2020, it's going to consume all the world's energy. We made it through 2020, so we're still alive. I wonder what their next deadline is. But what does happen is as mining continues to grow, do we ever reach a point where we're like, oh shit, we're using all the renewable energy already? Where do we go from here? Like, can this get so big where it actually is a concern for you? Or do you think it's actually incentivizing us to think about that far sooner and we'd be better off for it?
Yeah, well, again, the incentives of the network are so strong, and the dynamics of the industry are such that you can only consume energy up to a certain price, right? Like, so like you're not going to consume all the energy of the world because you're going to competing with demand from people that need to use their computers and live stream, and they're going to be willing to pay more than a Bitcoin miner would, because a Bitcoin miner wouldn't be profitable at that point. So no, Bitcoin miner won't consume all the energy on the world, but it will consume a lot of energy. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's going to consume these energy sources that are being wasted, stranded, and untapped, right? And so again, the incentives are so strong that Bitcoin, the incentive to drive your cost of power production down to $0 and below, that incentive is so strong that I believe that Bitcoin mining is going to incentivize us to become like a society that runs on nuclear power, which is the cleanest energy. And that's purely market incentives driving. You don't need subsidies from a Green New Deal or anything like that to bring this green energy to market. The profit incentives of Bitcoin miners are such that they're going to innovate and bring clean renewables to the market in the form of nuclear. I think that's the end goal. As soon as we cap all these flare stacks and all the vented gas and balance out the loads and of the stranded hydroelectric, the next thing is going to be like, all right, how do we drive our prices even lower? Nuclear is the only option, and Bitcoin miners are going to figure out a way to bring safe nuclear to market, safe, cheap nuclear to market.
Bitcoin is the orange New Deal. We don't really need a Green New Deal subsidy there.
We don't. No, that's the beauty of it, right? It's like a free market solution to these problems. You don't need to
the government
debate.
To fund it.
Yeah, you don't need to debate in the House of Representatives and Congress and at the executive level. You don't have to wait on those assholes to get something done, and they typically misallocate that capital, that subsidy capital that they spread out. Like, the market is figuring this problem out in the real time. It's a beautiful thing, and more people need to come around to it because this is the best way forward. You don't need to wait to make the world a better place. It's happening right now. You can join us.
I'm going to fire 2 or 3 more, just rapid fire at you. These were the most talked about on Twitter. Is there a way to see how much miners are selling, and like, does that collusion like matter? Is there just massive groups of miners that are working to suppress the price of Bitcoin? That's something that comes up all the time.
I don't think so. There was a chart floating around last week that was I forget what pool they were pointing at. It really misrepresented the way pool payouts work. It's hard to collude, especially due to the nature of mining pools and how those payouts work. Like, it's hard to know exactly what's going on once those rewards leave the mining pool and get distributed to the individual miners. I can tell you, at Great American Mining, our goal is to mine and hold as much Bitcoin as possible. It's literally why we started the business. We think it's going to be the best way to acquire Bitcoin in the 2030s, and so we want to make sure that we're set up and scaled up to take advantage of that a decade from now. So that's just us as an individual miner. That's our goal. We're going to sell only as much Bitcoin as we need to cover expenses and make sure we can expand our operations. But our end goal is not just to we're Bitcoiners. We believe that the world is transitioning to a Bitcoin standard, and we want to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible. I can speak for ourselves, can't speak for many other miners, but I think if I had to guess,
That's their goal as well.
Yeah, most of them are thinking that way.
The last one we could probably spend an hour on, so I'm going to ask you to give a shortened, explain it like I'm 5 version, but people talk about all this Bitcoin being produced in China. And there was a really epic conversation between Mike Green and Nick Carter on the Grant Williams show. And I would say like almost 50% of his points, like almost all of his questions tied back to this thing. Like if he ever conceded a point, he'd say, well, it's China producing all the Bitcoin, and that's not good for America. And I've also seen the counterpoint that Bitcoin, in its essence, is a very American thing, and we're starting to see more mining happen in America. Is this a concern that so much mining happens in China, whether or not it's because their power is cheaper or because the pools kind of form there? Is there actually concern that mining is centralizing in China? Is that hurting potentially? Does it pose a national security risk? These are some of the far-fetched ideas I've heard, but also I don't understand them well enough to say, no, that's blanket wrong. What's kind of your thoughts there?
I mean, you don't want to have Bitcoin mining concentrated in any country, let alone China, which is ruled by a communist regime. And let's be honest, like up to this point in Bitcoin's life cycle, like most mining has happened in China, but that distribution is moving away from China, and you got to hand it to, like, that's one thing I like to say, lads. It's very ironic that you have some of the best innovators in the Bitcoin space overall, let alone the mining space, are in China, right? And it's crazy. Like they have the best hardware, the best pools, and the biggest operations up to this point.
Why is that? Were they focused on it first? Was it just like a cultural thing? Like,
despite the fact that they live under a communist regime, the individuals within those borders are very capitalistic. It's like to take risk and have innovated. It's just a fact. It's like something as Americans you should be like, fuck, like they're out innovating us here. And I think people are starting to realize that. But yeah, so slowly over time, that distribution in China has gotten significantly less, and I think that will continue. I think we're going to see a large transition of hash rate distribution in North America, places like Kazakhstan, Russia, Iran, Venezuela are mining as well. Like, these are countries people don't like to hear, but mining is getting more distributed, and it will be in Europe as well. And again, as nuclear pops up, it will become even more distributed. But one thing, like the nature of the Chinese entrepreneurs in the mining industry, they understand the threat of the CCP. We've actually talked to miners in China that have large operations, and they understand the political risk and the geographical distribution risk, and they have actually looked to co-locate machines outside of the Chinese borders just to de-risk their business operations. So I don't think it's certainly worrying. It hasn't been a problem, right? Like if China wanted to overtake Bitcoin via mining in 51% attack, their best chance was 5 years ago,
right?
3 years ago.
It gets harder every day.
It's getting harder every day, and I think it's getting to the point that it's going to be impossible. And again, the entrepreneurs in the mining industry within China are very, very aware of that particular political and geographic distribution risk, and they're actively working to mitigate it. It was worrying for a while. It's getting less of a problem. It's becoming less of a problem, and I think that trend will continue.
So whether it's the FUD that China is controlling Bitcoin based on their mining, whether it's Bitcoin mining is destroying the planet, it's using all the planet's energy, whether it's, I don't even know. I mean, I'm going to wait for tomorrow's headline. All of those FUD pieces, in one example still, I think Great American Mining is the best one. I just don't get it. Like, it just simply does not make sense to me. I think at first, maybe it's someone uninformed. But after listening to this, I don't know how anyone can have that view without just being disingenuous. I really don't. So, Marty, I appreciate you coming on, man. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've wanted to do this for a while. I've used both you and Matt, your co-host, several times as I've been learning about Bitcoin and had some media appearances. And I was like, guys, can you prep me real quick if they ask me anything? So you guys have always been an incredible resource for me. I always ask this, what do you have to show for people that want to keep up with what you're working on, hear more about this topic, ask you questions because you've been so helpful to me? Where can they find you? What should they be following? What should they be watching?
Yeah. Well, thank you for all that, Luke. Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Man.
That's a long time coming. Like you said, I'm excited that we got this in the bag. If your audience wants to find me, I'm on Twitter at Marty Bent. The content I produce for the podcast and the newsletter, you can find at tftc.io. And then check us out at GAM, Great American Mining. Our website's gam.ai. We released a blog post last week that describes how the Bitcoin mining industry and the oil and gas industry can work together to form a symbiotic relationship to make each other more resilient. I highly recommend you go check that out. And if some of your audience is in the oil and gas industry and you're curious to see how Bitcoin mining can help your operations from a profitability perspective, we have a gas to hash calculator that allows you to sort of plug in how much gas you're producing, the BTU content, and a couple of Bitcoin miners to highlight and articulate how much money you can make by using your gas to mine Bitcoin versus selling it to market at Henry Hub prices. So yeah, gam.ai, and we have our gas to hash calculator that I recommend you check out.
Man, you're helping the planet one Bitcoin at a time. It's the Orange New Deal. And for anyone listening, please, I'm going to ask you again, share this with a journalist on Twitter or on Facebook, or if you know one personally, I would love to take them out. And if no one takes me up on that deal, Marty, I hope I can visit one of your plants, see that flare in person. It sounds amazing, dude. I want to see it.
Well, I can't wait to take you out there. And hopefully by the time our trip happens, we'll be able to go to Texas where it's a little warmer. And
I'm on board with that. Yeah, very
down.
Get
your long johns on for that one.
Cool. I'm down for the warm weather. Marty Bent, ladies and gentlemen, go follow him. I'm going to have his links down below. And stop listening to that. Stop listening to the FUD. Stop coming to my mentions with the FUD. I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of it. Share it with your local journalist. Help the world. Help the planet Earth be a better place. Choose Bitcoin. Thanks for coming on, Marty.
Thanks, Luke. It's been a pleasure.